Will, how are you,
Perfect.
buddy?
Good. Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I've congratulations on the release of your book, "Trust the Plan: The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Unhinged America." I've just finished it, and excellent. I think it's safe to say it is the book on QAnon.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. I was, been kind of following your work with the Daily Beast, listened to Fever Dreams a lot, and you really are kind of, boots on the ground journalism and have been covering this stuff for, a very, very long time. What was it like? What was your journey like? Just exploring this movement, attending some of these events, and just making your whole, making so much of your life about QAnon for so many years.
Yeah, it has been a journey. I think that's a good way to put it. It's had its ups and downs. Yeah, I mean, so sort of the short story of it is that I come from a conservative background and growing up, and so I had this real appetite for conservative media, and so in about 2015, all these characters started emerging, and suddenly, with Donald Trump running for office, people beyond me cared about them, and my wife said, rather than telling me about this every night, why don't you start writing about it? And so I started writing about them, and then in 2017, QAnon started, and so I was already covering the right wing, but this was something that was even crazier than anything I could have imagined, frankly. And then, so I guess a couple big moments for me. I went to a rally they had in April of 2018, and I thought, this is so weird that QAnon people are meeting in person. I thought this was maybe a couple dozen people, and instead it was a couple hundred in DC, and they were chanting their slogans and all this. And I thought, well, QAnon's never going to get bigger than this. And obviously it kept going. And so it has really been, it's been very bizarre to watch it grow. And sort of at every point I thought that was the high watermark for it, and it kept going.
Yeah. What was it also like being a journalist throughout the Trump era, as Trump kind of had a war on journalism, that just anyone that wasn't in line with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a strange experience. I mean, certainly, it's not like pre-Trump journalists were exactly beloved in the United States.
Right.
And that, I think a lot of that is we've had just decades of attacks from Republicans on sort of anything they see as a sort of an independent source of truth, or or something that is going to stand up to their lies. And so that's academia, science, all this kind of stuff. And so in this case, the media was included in that. But really, Trump really ratcheted up those attacks, and what went from I may disagree with the media, but I think they lie, stuff like that. Politicians might say, goes to this idea of the enemy of the people, this idea that, the media are subversives or something like that. And, you look at Trump rallies where they really would get very nasty with people, and he would say, look at this, there's guys in the media pen, and people would scream at the media, stuff like that. I mean, it was a very weird experience. And certainly, in my case, going to QAnon rallies and stuff like that, where, they see the media not just as a bunch of hacks, but working for a satanic cabal. And so that sort of, that adds a bit more tension to it.
And especially at the Trump events now, where the only people covering it really are like right side news broadcasting, and they're all pointing at them and getting really angry and
yes, yeah. Honestly, it's an interesting point. I mean, I've only been to a few Trump rallies, but in these press pens, what qualifies as press is very broad. And so, you'll have people who are applauding Trump, who are ostensibly reporters. And I mean, obviously these are for random Rumble channels that we've never heard of. But I mean, it is a very odd experience, that aspect as well.
You, towards the end of your book, you outline being, basically escorted out of one of these QAnon meetings or events that you bought a ticket under your own name. And yeah, I mean, what was that like, actually just being the butt of being targeted? And, throughout this whole journey, did you have any worries of your safety?
Yeah. So I'll just tell that story. I mean, I went in Dallas in the summer of 2021. They were having this big QAnon convention. And one of the things I thought was interesting about it was that it was going to attract not just the heavyweights of QAnon, such as they are, but also members of Congress and the head of the Texas Republican Party, and Sidney Powell, who's kind of a big lawyer for the Trump campaign. And so I thought, this is so strange that these people are really infiltrating the Republican Party. So I wanted to go down there, like other people who kind of follow QAnon, including Travis from the QAnon Anonymous podcast. I signed up, and for whatever reason, they did not refund me and say, they said to Travis, for example, you're not welcome here, but they didn't say it to me, which was great because I bought a hotel room and everything. And so I went down there, and I mean, I thought it was a great idea. Oh, I've got to get my hotel room in the same hotel as all these people so I can get the color, right? Well, it goes a little south when suddenly I have to stay in this hotel with all these people who know I'm there and, are out for my blood and all this. But so then, so I did a couple days at the event, and I sort of, I was able to get my ticket, and I sort of grew out my beard and wore a hat and some sunglasses to be a little less obvious. But unfortunately for me, there was another reporter there who, I guess, whereas I had grown out my beard, he had shaved his beard. And so they were looking, and he was tweeting like, I snuck in, whatever. And so they were looking, their sort of militia group was looking for a guy with a beard. And so, I'm by day 3 looking pretty bored and just on my phone a lot. And they think, this guy doesn't seem to love QAnon enough. And so I start noticing, these guys, these private security guys are sitting around me and kind of looking at me. I'm going, oh boy. And then Michael Flynn gets up and he starts saying, I can't believe that there's a journalist who snuck in here today. And I was looking around like, oh boy, somebody's in trouble.
A targeted individual.
Exactly. You know what? That's a great point. I was being gang stalked, honestly, because at one point I was sort of like, all right, let's just bring this to a head and see if these guys are following me. And I got up to go to the bathroom and suddenly like just swarmed by guys. And then so ultimately they were police at the event who were, just running doing security. And so they were asked to escort me out. And then, hundreds of people, just shame on you, all this stuff. And then a bunch of people chased me to my car and stuff. I mean, it was a pretty intense experience. And then of course I got to go back and sit in my hotel room till my flight the next day.
And it was Jordan Sather was just like live streaming the thing and just being like, yes, we got him. Right.
Yes. Well, and he's really, of course, this big QAnon guy, Jordan Sather, and he's obsessed with, he wants to sue me so bad because I have pointed out that he's encouraging people to inject a substance that's essentially equivalent to bleach.
I got suspended from Twitter for mentioning that. I was like, drink the bleach. Suspended.
And so, because he's saying, well, a lot of people saying you're libeling people. And, he's obviously talking about himself here. And there was another guy, there was just a really crazy guy who just ripped his shirt off and was chasing me. I mean, it was, it was honestly like, it was a real like sensory overload.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, I'm just going to go to my rental car and leave the scene here.
Yeah. Yeah. One big part of your book that I just found super interesting, and I think a lot of the people who don't follow QAnon super closely and are in the weeds of a lot of this stuff kind of miss out on so many of the unique characters in this tragic comedy. And there are a lot of them. There are like a lot of them. And I was really wanting to kind of quiz you about, QAnon or whatever you want to call it post-Q, being a real breeding ground for grifters, kind of con artists, and particularly wannabe cult leaders. There was a fair few characters in your book that you covered that I've got a lot of questions for. I mean, maybe one of the more kind of funny ones would be Vincent Fusco. I mean, Fusca. Who is Vincent?
Fusca.
Well, that's JFK Jr. to you.
Yeah.
Right. So that's right. And I mean, you're totally right that there is this, it's a movement that attracts all these charlatans and grifters because already, I mean, if you believe in QAnon, you've kind of self-selected as a pretty gullible person often. And you're sort of saying, I'm willing to take the word of this person identified only by a letter. And so, I think it's natural that a lot of grifters also latch onto that. And so in this case, I mean, Vincent Fusca is a guy who his sort of claim to fame in QAnon is that they think he's John F. Kennedy Jr. in disguise. And so they think that he faked his death in this plane crash in the 90s and that he, went undercover to help Trump take down the deep state. In reality, he's sort of a scruffy looking guy, in maybe his 50s or so.
Italian immigrant.
Exactly.
And not an
Irish
Catholic.
Yes, a good point. Yeah, and also, I mean, this is in terms of the disparities between the two of them. I mean, John F. Kennedy Jr. was this famous sex symbol. He was memorably on Seinfeld, or he was much discussed on Seinfeld. All this stuff. And then Vincent Fusco is kind of like he's sort of a shabbily dressed guy who wears a fedora. But essentially, he's a guy who's a Trump super fan, and he was at these rallies. And so he'd be behind Trump a lot. And they would say, rather than, okay, I guess this guy gets these Trump VIP tickets, they would say, I think that's JFK Jr. He's there to protect Trump. And so now this is a guy who shows up at every vaguely Trump event. I mean, he's at all the conferences, and he doesn't say I'm JFK Jr., but he sort of, he lets you, if that's the impression you have, he's not going to dispel it.
And he did run for office, didn't he? For Congress?
I think there was a movement to draft him. I'm not 100% sure if he ran, but you might be right about that. It's one of these kind of classic things where I think maybe he did it and then forgot about it and sort of moved on. So, it's sometimes hard to know with this.
Hey, can you give me any insight? I mean, I've spoken to Twitter user Karma 2023 and gone, deep into the weeds of the negative 48 cult.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give me any insight? I've still not been able to get any answer on this as to what the obsession with JFK Jr. is. Why have they chosen JFK Jr.? Why do they think he's the basically the second coming of Christ kind of story attached to him? Why him of all people?
Yeah, so let's put on our Freudian hats here, and because I think it's a very deep psychological reason. So, first we can establish that I think QAnon believers often are baby boomers, right? And so I think the Kennedy assassination was a big moment and kind of a big epical moment in their lives. And then JFK Jr. obviously is Kennedy's son, and so I think there is this moment of this idea that moment can be redeemed, or somehow there can be some closure if he is alive, and that if he somehow gets revenge on the deep state for his father's assassination. I mean, it's very weird. And it is, but there is, essentially what happened is the Q went away for a little bit, and it's someone named R, who's the letter after Q in the alphabet, said, oh yeah, I'm running the show now. And JFK Jr. is he's alive. And so, ultimately Q comes back and does this sort of excommunication of JFK Jr. believers and says, this is not true. This is not part of QAnon, but it persists, among, I would say, a good 20 to 30% of them. And it is really weird. I mean, there is no, I don't have a great explanation for it. I think it is ultimately a really emotional one. I mean, another one of these JFK Jr. impersonators has a book called The Kid by the Side of the Road. And so this is a reference to the real JFK Jr., as a child saluting his father's hearse. And so I think if you put yourself in that mindset, this kind of the loss of America's innocence, this kind of stuff, I think that goes a little bit of the way to explaining it.
I think that's a really, really good explanation.
Thanks. I've had a lot of occasion to think about it. Yeah. And I think also, look, he was a hot guy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's also that kind of they're not just wishing that I don't know, some random other guy who died or is related to his there's also, I think, this very what if this hunk, came back to life and helped Trump? There's that too.
What they imagine Trump to be in the memes.
Yeah.
But
exactly. This really ripped those kind of Ben Garrison cartoons. Exactly.
Did you get to talk to Vincent Fusco at all?
Oh, I talk to him all the time. He texted me, I think, a few days ago.
Really?
And this is what's so weird. Oh, yeah. This is what's so weird about it is that he is, because as I said, he doesn't say I am JFK Jr., but he knows that everyone thinks he's this way. And so I run into him at all these events and I say, hey, can we talk about how you're JFK Jr. or whatever? And he says, oh, gotta go, look at the time. But I'll tell you what, I'm in town for another day. So just you got my number. So just call me tonight and we'll meet up or we can do an interview. And then it ghosts me. This happened 4 or 5 times now that I've run into him. But then he'll text me if there's a rival JFK Jr. he doesn't like. He'll say what's this guy up to? Something like that. Yeah. So he's very much we communicate, but he refuses to address the core thing. And I say this in the book is it just drives me crazy because, he goes out and all these women his age are just oh my God, it's JFK Jr. Can we get a selfie? I think he really soaks up the attention. But, obviously he's playing into this lie.
He's in it for the middle-aged ladies.
I think he's doing pretty well as well.
Well, he talked to this one for the book. I talked to these women who took a selfie with him, and she said, haven't you ever heard of Hollywood? It's special effects. Because I said, he doesn't look anything like him.
It's like a Mission Impossible, like he's wearing a flesh mask or something.
Yes,
awesome.
yes, he's going to unzip the head.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about, so reading your book, like the one chapter that I found kind of harrowing and a bit quite sad was the Baby Q story.
Austin Steinbart.
Yeah. Like going over a lot of that material, I found it, to be quite impactful. I'd love it if you could tell us about Austin Steinbach, because a lot of people don't know about this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. So this guy, this is a guy who led sort of a faction of QAnon named Austin Steinbart, who, like many QAnon promoters, sorry guys, give me 1 second. Like many QAnon promoters, was a guy who's sort of a classic loser, or maybe not having the life he would have wanted. He was essentially an IT guy who had dropped out of college, a guy in his 20s, and then QAnon hits, and he says, well, not only do I believe in QAnon, but I am Q. And you might say, well, you're 24. How can you be Q? But he claimed, yes, Q is me in the future, let's say 20 years from now. And he's using essentially a time-traveling computer to send messages back to me in the past. So as a result, I've invested in Bitcoin on his advice. I'm a billionaire, all this stuff. And the reason he stood out to me among QAnon promoters was because I got a call from a woman who said, my sister has been sucked into this, what she described as a cult, essentially. He's got a compound out in the desert in Arizona, and my sister has moved in with him along with a dozen other followers. And they really think that their lives are going to be promoting QAnon with this guy. And then meanwhile, the FBI got involved and he got arrested, and there were these guns and drugs and all this stuff. And so, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I really tried to, there's a lot of comedy in QAnon, and we'll go crazy if we don't acknowledge that. But there is also a tragedy in it. And in this case, the woman who called me abruptly died, suddenly. And then, by the end of the story, I meet her and Steinbart, and they're still very much in it. And, she's dating him, and it's very much in the family. Her family's getting on board with QAnon as well. I mean, it's very much I think it just showed how difficult it is to get out of it.
So this guy is so it's all still going with Austin Steinbart. He's still basically, I mean, he falls into the category of a wannabe or maybe even successful cult leader. Like this is all still happening. People, he has devotees.
Very much so.
That's, I mean, what do you think's going on with this guy? Do you think he is a crafty con man trying to find his point of difference, or do you think he's actually like a kind of schizophrenic, mentally ill person who believes his own delusions, or what's your hunch?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so often with these QAnon leaders, it's a question of like how much do they believe it and how much are they profiting from it, and how much. I think oftentimes it's a mix of both. I mean, I think it's often that they believe it, and then there are a lot of incentives in their lives to keep promoting it and believing it because maybe they believe in other stuff, maybe they believe in Bigfoot and stuff, but only this thing is what's getting them all this money and this attention. And so in his case, I mean, this is a guy who sort of one of his big claims to fame was that he was at this neurology clinic as a patient, and he gets access to these patient files of all these football players and publishes them and breaks the law, all this stuff. But what was interesting about it was he claimed, oh, no, my mom sent me there for my ADD. Yeah, well, I mean, this also corresponds with the time that he started to say, I'm Q. And so, I do think it's reasonable to suspect that there are some mental issues going on, but he's certainly very sort of high functioning in the world. And I think he's a guy with, I think people have described as, I think it's fair to say, having sort of sociopathic tendencies. He loves claiming to do crimes. I mean, he did some crimes, and essentially his point was, look at me, I can act with impunity. Obviously, when he went to prison, that was not the case. But, this is a guy who, I mean, really some sort of twisted aspects to it. I mean, there was a guy who was sort of locally famous for killing himself by lighting himself on fire. And he said, no, I did that. I murdered that guy. I mean, really some twisted stuff. So definitely, I think understandably, a guy, I understood why this woman did not want her sister hanging out with him.
Imagine being that like narcissistic that you start seeing Q posts, think that's really interesting. That must be me.
That's
That's me.
I think that's me. Yeah, this
That
guy's
must be
pretty
me,
cool.
like in the future or something. I guess like that's something I would do. I'm taking that one. Yeah.
And in terms of like, no, I was just going to say, in terms of how sort of, I think divorced he was from reality. I mean, at one point the FBI comes to his door and says like, hey, you've been doing all these crimes. And he says, yeah, I know. I'm working for the government just like you guys. Like I deal drugs, I kill people, all this stuff, and I get to do whatever I want. And then the FBI, when I sent my draft of the book in, my editor said, there has to be something missing here. Why didn't they arrest him immediately? What am I missing? And I said, I don't know. They just said, I think they were so surprised. They just said, that was odd.
Yeah, maybe just cross that threshold of kind of crazy. This guy's just crazy. He's just saying a whole bunch of stuff or something. You can actually admit to so much that they'll just disengage.
Do we know what drugs he was dealing?
I sort of suspect he was not actually dealing drugs because it was not like I'm selling dime bags or speedballs or whatever, but it was like I'm running guns from Mexico, or I'm running drugs from Mexico. This kind of Sicario type stuff that I think very much fit with his image of being this super spy rather than I think anything realistic.
Massive delusions of grandeur constantly.
Exactly, and then matched with the mundanity of his actual life, which involved, being out on probation and he can't drink beer, and suspecting that his followers are videotaping him drinking beer, and buying a fake penis so that he could cheat on drug tests and all this kind of stuff. I mean, just a guy that, I think I'm throwing a lot out at the audience here, but it's a guy who, and what a weird story it was. And so as I was watching this develop, I was just like, I got to save this for the book. I can't do an article on this because there is way too much here. And if you do it in these kind of incremental ways, people are going to say, what the heck? But fortunately, I think it came out all right in the book.
Yeah, well, I read it, I bought your book and read it, and then had to listen, I bought the audiobook as well, and then listened back to that chapter, and I'm just like, there's so much here. I can't really wrap my head around this guy, baby Q.
Did he in terms of his followers and stuff, has he demonstrated any particularly dangerous activity? Like, is he kind of doing the classic having sex with his female followers? I know you said he's married to that lady that moved in with him now, or has he done any kind of abusive or posed any actual direct dangerous activity or threat?
Yeah, it's interesting. As far as I know, I mean, I think the main issue was that people were spending all of this money that they had on his endeavors. And so, there was one guy I talked to who said he had put $50,000 into it. And he was still very devoted to Austin Steinbart, and was, Steinbart had said, you're a federal agent, get out of my sight. And, he had demanded that this guy dump his fiance because he thought she was a federal agent and stuff. And then this guy was still completely devoted to him. And at one point he was kicked out of the compound because Steinbart was having these kind of paranoid delusions. And the guy said, all I want is one phone call so I can get back in with him. I mean, it really was very just so strange. So much of the book is about belief, and why do these people believe in QAnon despite everything telling them that it's fake. And so, Steinbart was certainly an extreme example of that.
Was that into crypto? Like the money? Was he just doing a crypto scam?
It's a great question. I mean, they honestly, they spent a lot of money on, they had a TV level production studio making these YouTube videos that only I would watch, and they would say, it's like they had all these shows. And so there would be the Millennial Wellness QAnon show, and where they would drink White Claws and all this stuff. And I mean, it was so weird, and I think that's where the money went. But, he claimed, of course, to have these billions in Bitcoin, right, that he was going to use to create the Space Force because he got these time traveling messages. But then his followers say, Austin hasn't paid the bill at dinner in a while, or they'd say, Austin, he never buys the beer for the parties, but he's a billionaire? Something here isn't matching up.
One other character that fascinates me as well that you covered is Romana Didulo. Dadula. I can never say that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, a lot of them have all kinds of different pronunciations.
Right.
So,
So I'm actually, I'm on her Telegram group and just kind of keep tabs on them from time to time. But
She's sending out fake money now.
Really?
Yeah, she's making her own currency.
Fantastic. Excellent.
We're going to be rich.
Can you give us a brief summary of who this individual is and what her point of difference is?
Yeah. So Romana Didulo is the QAnon queen of Canada, and essentially this is this person who was a very marginal figure in Canada. She had this political party that essentially she was the only member of, and then QAnon hits. And she says, QAnon appointed me the Queen of Canada. And so, move over, Justin Trudeau. I'm the real government now. And she managed to get all these followers. And, I think it's fair to say easily thousands of people in Canada think that she's the government. A lot of them, won't, they won't pay their utility bills. They won't pay their mortgages or their taxes because they say Romana's the real queen, and she travels the country in this fleet of RVs. And then when it gets really crazy, you have these situations where she was saying essentially, shoot people who are involved in vaccinations or shoot people who vaccinate children. And one of her followers was arrested with a bunch of guns. And he had said, maybe I'll go do this. So, I mean, there really is she stands out. I guess she has like a very nasty edge. It's weird to say that, she's a unusually unpleasant QAnon figure, but I would say that.
She seems quite malevolent to me. Like there was that video that was released where someone wouldn't move out of the way of the RV and they were protesting or something, or it was a construction worker that was, flipping her the bird, and she's basically like got a shotgun on the dash and they're kind of gesturing to it.
It's very intense. Yeah. I mean, you get these videos of them like screaming at people. I mean, the Vice Canada has done this reporting on these people who fall out with her and then suddenly they're out tens of thousands of dollars, or she'll leave them on the side of the road in some random part of Canada. And they're obsessed with this disco song. I had not heard this song before. It's the band Boney M's song Rasputin, and it goes like rah rah Rasputin.
Yeah,
it was a big thing in the 70s apparently. Yeah. And so, but they play it like on a loop in the RV, just like 24 hours a day. So if you imagine how twisted that is, just all these people just like dancing to this 50-year-old disco song, and as they're just like, veering in and out like on the highway. I mean, it's a crazy thing.
Very Jim Jones, isn't it?
I was about to say that.
Yeah.
It's like they keep people really, really tired, blast them with the same material constantly, and the worse the material is, Boney M, the more that
I don't
it
mind
tires
the song.
them
I kind of
out.
like that
You
song.
like it, do you?
Yeah. Well, maybe you would fit right in the Romana.
I'm
RV.
primed for a cult. I'm primed. Did you say she's got thousands of followers?
I'm honestly, I'm kind of pulling that number out of the air, but I mean, she has tens of thousands of people on Telegram, and just these stories about people who are, Romana, I'm not paying my bills anymore, and then suddenly, Romana, they've turned off my electricity. What do I, how do I get the Queen involved in this? I mean, I'm spitballing, but I think that's a reasonable guess.
Totally, and it's like them waiting for Nasara or the dinar. Is it?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
That's what's that? The Iraqi dollar? Is
Yeah,
that?
yeah. They're all going to be billionaires in any moment now.
Yeah, full scam.
Yeah, and that's an aspect of QAnon that I think is in the book, but I think is often underplayed, is the sort of the personal wealth aspect, and this idea that after all the pedophiles are arrested and Donald Trump institutes a dictatorship, that if you rent your home, you'll own it, and all of these sort of crazy pie in the sky ideas that if you invested in this worthless Iraqi dinar currency, you'll become a billionaire, and so there's sort of this grift along the way, of course, for the people selling things like the dinar, but then for the believers, there's this idea of, not just that, the children will be saved, but I personally will be fabulously wealthy.
And it's strange because they seem to be so anti-socialist in their ideology, but these are quite socialist ideas. Taking care of the people. They're quite like left-wing ideas.
Their ideas are like, it's, what did they say? Like luxury space communism. I mean, it's really like crazy stuff that Bernie Sanders wouldn't support suddenly, like taking all private property,
Yeah.
And so I think often people are driven into QAnon because, you know, I don't want to downplays with the malevolent motivations people have for getting into QAnon. I mean, there is the racism, the anti-Semitism, just the general like nastiness and this resentment that drives people into it. But at the same time, often when I talk to people who are, let's say, deep enough into QAnon for me to be interviewing them, right? So there is sort of they can often really trace why they got into it in this personal moment in their lives. And often it's because of a medical debt or some other medical issue or another debt thing. And so all of these reasons, and rather than say, well, you know, it is pretty messed up we don't have universal health care in the United States, for example, they say, ooh, this cabal is, you know, the reason I've been ruined. And so yeah, I mean, there really is. It's interesting that there's this very, they have like a very left-wing critique often of the economy, but rather than making it sort of a systemic one, they say, oh, well, it's because George Soros and Bill Gates have corrupted the economy.
Were there any characters that you personally just either they just cracked you up, they were just so ridiculous that you're personal favorites, or any that actually really genuinely frightened you?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. I mean, honestly, like just constant, like I was constantly cracking up. I mean, you know, how could you, in just the feuds they get into? I mean, one of my favorite aspects of it is how, you know, these factions will emerge. And of course, that makes reporting on them really easy because they're constantly secretly recording one another and giving them to reporters. Or, I mean, just the idea that like this stuff, I used to cover like City Hall here, and it did not happen. You didn't have council members just saying, well, I got you on a recording, you know, but here it happens constantly in QAnon. And so, or you have this aspect of, you know, whatever branch of QAnon you belong to, that is the serious like research. This is a patriots research movement, and we take everything really seriously. The other QAnon guys, those are the idiots. Those are the ones who are making us look bad. And so these people who believe that, you know, Hillary Clinton drinks blood and all this stuff, they look at the JFK Jr. people and they're like, that guy's a moron. You know, that guy, oh, don't stand near me. You know, you're going to make, you know, and then, you know, then I write an article about them and they'll say, see, these people are Will Sommer's making us all look like fools. And so, you know, there is, in terms of who's scary, I mean, so many of them as well. I think just going to these events, and, you know, I mentioned the Dallas QAnon conference. I went to one in Oklahoma, and just when sometimes, you know, the speaker, and so many of these speakers are just so boring. I mean, that's why I got in trouble, because I was just reading Twitter instead of listening to them. But like some of them are so boring. And then when you get a good one up there who says, you know, we're going to march on Washington, we're going to stop these pedophiles, and we're going to kill them and all this stuff. And you just have like thousands of people just surge to their feet and just cry for blood. I mean, it is really intense. And you think about that energy more broadly in the country. Yeah. And then you look at January 6th.
How did you feel when Trump started just openly retweeting QAnon content?
Yeah, it's crazy. I still can't get over it. And you know, I think in the political media here in the United States, there's always been a reluctance to sort of look QAnon in its face and understand what it is, which is sort of a fascist movement, and because, you know, the reporters say they don't want to take the time to learn what it is, and they don't want to acknowledge that the Republican Party has gone completely nuts, because then, you know, you don't feel like an objective reporter. But these guys, they, you know, and so as a result, I think when Trump starts getting into retweeting, you know, oh, he's not retweeting Mitch McConnell, he's retweeting, you know, like Pepe 17, you know, open eyes emoji. Yeah, cat turd is a great example. And so, I mean, it's very strange. And then in particular, you know, in the past few months, he's started just posting memes of himself wearing Q buttons and stuff like that. I mean, I think he's really prepping to, you know, we know the people who run his social media site, Truth Social, have said, like, we see our site as a home for QAnon, and that's one aspect for us. And when you think about, oh, you know, QAnon, people have been murdered for QAnon, right? And people have murdered members of their family. So yeah, it's pretty twisted.
During the pandemic, you know, I mean, there's so many beliefs and varied beliefs within all this conspiracy narrative. But, you know, one pretty popular belief throughout the pandemic was, you know, the vaccines are actually going to depopulate, or they're a bioweapon, or COVID was a bioweapon. But there was a lot of there's degrees to the anti-vax things, and some people have genuine concerns, but then there's the real intense stuff that's very conspiratorial. How do those people reckon with the fact that Trump, it's Trump's vaccine? He boasts that this is one of my great achievements.
Warp speed, man.
He's also
Yes.
signaling to QAnon. How do they reckon with that?
I mean, it's a huge contradiction, right? I mean, so much of QAnon is holding these ideas in your head at the same time. Like, for example, the world elites were in league with Jeffrey Epstein, right? At the same time, we have all these pictures of Trump partying with Jeffrey Epstein, right? So how do they deal with that? Well, they say Trump was infiltrating Jeffrey Epstein's group. And, he took this prosecutor who gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal and made him a cabinet official. Well, Trump was trying to draw attention to that bad deal by elevating this guy's public profile. So in the case of the vaccines, I mean, I'll be honest, they don't really know how to deal with it. I mean, I think some of them say Trump was fooled, or they say, he's playing 5D chess and, we can't understand the moves. I mean, the book's called Trust the Plan, right? It's kind of, all these things that are like, trust the plan, patriots are in control, you're watching a movie, take it easy. And so honestly, there is a lot of that. I mean, there's, I'll be honest, they don't have a great explanation.
Yeah, it's faith. It sounds like it's faith-based.
Sorry. And I was just going to say, like, Alan Dershowitz is a talking head on Fox constantly and was named in the lawsuit against Jeffrey Epstein. And yet he is supposedly like how does that work? Like, he goes on Fox all the time, and they're supposed to be, very anti-Epstein. Everyone should be, but there's Alan Dershowitz every night on Fox.
I know. I mean, the whole thing is very weird.
I've spoken with a lot of conspiracy theorists on this podcast, and, there really seems to be, I'm wondering what your opinion on this is. So many of them seem to be very, very Christian, very religious.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel, I'm pretty sure America is a lot more Christian than Australia. But yeah, I mean, what do you think is the relationship between, fundamentalist Christianity? Because I've spoken with flat earthers, and I've spoken with flat earthers that have gotten into Christianity as a result of their interest in flat earth movement. I've spoken to targeted individuals who are incredibly Christian and think this is a massive spiritual warfare, and that thread just goes all through QAnon as well. What do you think is what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge overlap, right? I mean, I think I've talked to people who get into QAnon because of their religion, and people who, as you said, I mean, it's just like the flat Earth people who get into Christianity because of QAnon, and they start, there's just this. I think there's this very visceral aspect of, particularly that QAnon shares with evangelical Christianity, particularly Pentecostalism, and these sort of charismatic churches where it's this very intense, like this performance and all this stuff. And this, the speaking in tongues, this kind of like the devil is a real guy and he's like out to get you. Like, this is not a metaphor, stuff like that. I mean, they call themselves digital soldiers, right? Or that they are at war. It's a huge aspect of it. I mean, and it really, and frankly, if I have one regret, it's that I don't have a stronger grounding in that topic, because I mean, it is basically one for one. I mean, when I go to these events, the way that QAnon has blended with to sort of created this weird, like, little add-on to Christianity. I mean, the prayers they do, I mean, they do altar calls, where people come up to the altar and they're going to pray over you. Okay, now it's QAnon time. I mean, all this, I mean, it is this idea that, I mean, they consider themselves warriors. And I think that's part of the appeal, right? Is that, you're not just living your regular life, but like you're a soldier, and all you really have to do is post online, to do it. And wait. So the barrier is pretty low.
And wait for the world to burn, and then everything will be fine, and you will be elated, and all of your people will too. And
yeah, I mean, it's a very kind of like sort of end of the world type thing, right? That it's, there's going to be this moment and all the bad people are going to be punished, and then we're all going to live in this utopia.
I mean, you mentioned Pentecostalism. Our ex-Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was a Pentecostal Christian, and you mentioned his brush with QAnon in the book there as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who was friends with a, the Prime Minister, obviously, but he was friends with a guy who was like a big deal Australian QAnon promoter. and they were. Is it called like residential schools? Is that what it was, or was it like the treatment of whatever?
Private school? Is it private schools? Like,
yeah, I'm like botching my like Australian politics, but essentially they were doing this apology for like a sex abuse scandal, and they were that essentially this person then slipped in, get in, in your speech you should include an apology for ritual sex abuse, which is sort of QAnon code for this idea of this sex abuse in satanic rituals.
it felt like when he did that he was kind of I thought he was kind of pandering to Trump a bit because.
Totally. I mean, and I feel like you guys know better than I do, but there is that. I feel like there is that admiration in Australian conservative politics and sort of this sort of like this love for sort of sucking up to Republican presidents.
I remember I called up the radio one time a few years back when I heard about Burn Spy, the person that was best friends with our ex-prime minister's wife, the QAnon influencer. And I was like, have you ever heard of QAnon? And he's like, what the hell is QAnon? And I was like, well, it's kind of blood libel stuff, conspiracy theory. But did you know that the Prime Minister's hanging out with these people? And yeah, he had no idea.
It runs deep, I mean, people wonder why, keep going on. Of all the conspiracy theories, keep going on about this one, but its tendrils have gone through. I mean, internationally, it really runs deep. It's something about it has really gone viral. Maybe it's like a post-internet world, because when conspiracies have always been around. I was very unironically into conspiracy theories in my early 20s. Went down the rabbit hole myself, and so much of this is just repackaged. It's just the new improved version. It's just like season 7, really, if you've been paying attention for a long time. But something about this one, they've if it's season 7, all the executives have figured out all the psychology of what will actually go viral, what will catch on the most, and that's how this one's kind of been repackaged, and it really doesn't seem to have gone away.
No, and I think it will be with us for a while longer. I mean, certainly, we've seen these precursor movements to QAnon, as you said. I mean, the one that springs to mind immediately is Pizzagate, which is sort of an ancestor of QAnon, and then its name became tarnished, and there were these lawsuits after there was a shooting at the pizzeria, and then it reemerges a year later as QAnon. And so people say to me, "Oh, I don't see people saying QAnon a lot anymore." And partially that's because Q said stop visibly identifying as QAnon believers, but I think, whether it's in QAnon form or something else, I think we're going to see it certainly with us for a while.
What are some of the more ridiculous, weird side narratives that go along with some of this conspiracy, theories? I mean, some that I've found that some of the side narratives that have blown my mind is that McDonald's food chain is using human meat, and that's all part of the cabal. They're actually getting sent the sacrificed children, churning them up, putting them in burgers, and they're hiding in plain sight. Another one...
The mole children.
Right.
Yeah, after the adrenochrome is extracted.
Yep. Yeah, they're no good anymore. Another one was the snake. I think Stu Peters, the snake venom is either COVID or in the vaccines or both. Snake venom.
I mean, all of those are great. I mean, certainly the idea that I love the symbols they're always looking for, but they always choose such common things, right? I mean, we think about pizza. So if you're ever photographed with pizza, they say you're like part of the cabal. Well, pizza's like the most popular food in the country, right? And so, or if you wear red shoes, that's a sign you're in the cabal.
You have time for one more question at all?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, great. I was just wondering if you had anything to say on the failures of the status quo or even the media that has led people, and what could actually be done about that. Big question, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a frustrating situation because, so many people in this book needed help and went to psychiatrists, or they went to the government. I mean, certainly in the case of people who are being harassed or terrorized by QAnon believers. And instead, they found themselves, in the case of some of these people, they would say, okay, what's this QAnon thing? Or why don't you log off or something, just turn your phone off. But, just how slow, all these institutions, including the FBI, were to get onto it, and the media. I mean, I kind of aired my grievances about the media a minute earlier, but I really think, so many institutions that could have helped people were really slow to take this seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. The book is Trust the Plan, The Rise of QAnon and the Conspiracy That Unhinged America. Also, Fever Dreams, your podcast is fantastic. I encourage everyone to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much,
thanks
Will.
for having me.
I'm a huge fan of your work and have been for years. It was absolutely a pleasure to speak with you. And Jake Rokotansky sends his best regards.
Oh, I mean, what a legend. I love that guy.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.